At 0214 AM, the Red Sea ceased to be a shipping lane and became a kill box. On board the USS Gravely, the calm hum of the Combat Information Center was shattered by a single, terrifying reality. Vampire, vampire, vampire. Multiple Iranian fast attack craft were sprinting out of the dark, hiding in the clutter of the waves, weapons unlocked, and closing fast. This wasn't a diplomatic signal, it was a coordinated ambush. Iran had decided that the Americans crossed an unforgivable line, and their answer was a swarm of lethal steel aimed directly at the Gravely's hull. But the attackers made a fatal miscalculation. They weren't hunting a helpless cargo ship. They were charging headfirst into the most advanced Aegis Combat System on the planet, and the retaliation was about to be merciless. To understand why the ocean exploded that night, we have to look at the map through the lens of the Pentagon's war room. The USS Gravely wasn't just aimlessly wandering the Red Sea, it was the tip of the spear for Operation Prosperity Guardian, a multinational coalition designed to stop exactly the kind of piracy that Tehran had been bankrolling. For weeks, Iranian-backed proxies had been turning this vital waterway into a shooting gallery, lobbing cheap drones at civilian tankers like kids throwing rocks at cars. But the Gravely isn't a tanker. It's 9,000 tons of American diplomacy, packed with Tomahawk missiles and the Aegis Combat System. Iran claimed the destroyer had breached their territorial waters, a convenient fiction they use whenever they want to justify aggression. In reality, the US Navy was conducting a standard freedom of navigation operation, asserting the right of the entire world to use international waters without paying a toll in blood to the Ayatollah. The strategic disconnect here is massive. The Iranians view the Red Sea as a private lake, a place where they can dictate the rules of engagement through grey zone tactics, actions just aggressive enough to hurt but theoretically below the threshold of full-scale war. They thought that by swarming a lone destroyer in the dead of night, they could score a propaganda victory, a photo op of a burning American ship to splash across state media. It was a gamble born of sheer arrogance. They looked at the Gravely and saw a target. They should have seen a floating fortress connected to a global surveillance grid that was watching their every move before they even started their engines. Satellites had already tracked the heat signatures of their engines warming up. The unforgivable line they claimed America crossed was simply the line between their lawlessness and international order. And by deciding to enforce their version of the law with gunpowder, they signed a warrant for their own destruction. The situation on the water deteriorated rapidly from a standoff to a kinetic threat. The contact tracks on the screens weren't just blips, they were Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps fast attack craft utilizing swarm tactics designed to overwhelm the defensive perimeter of a capital ship. These small, highly maneuverable vessels, likely armed with heavy machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades, were cutting through the waves at over 40 knots, running dark with their navigation lights extinguished. This is reckless, unprofessional behavior that violates every maritime protocol written since the 19th century, but professional conduct was clearly not on Tehran's agenda that night. They were trying to close the distance to knife-fighting range, getting close enough that the Gravely's larger missile systems would have trouble engaging due to minimum range arming safety limits. Inside the bridge of the USS Gravely, the mood shifted from cautious observation to combat readiness. The comms officer broadcast standard warnings over Channel 16, the International Maritime Distress Frequency, demanding the approaching vessels alter course. Unidentified surface contacts. This is United States warship. You are standing into danger. Alter course immediately. The response was silence. The Iranian boats ignored the hail, accelerating instead. Then came the electronic scream that every sailor dreads. The Gravely's AN SLQ-32 electronic warfare suite lit up. The lead Iranian boat hadn't just approached, it had turned on its fire-controlled radar. For the uninitiated, this is not a scanning radar used to see where you are going. It is a targeting beam used to guide a weapon to an impact point. In naval terms, painting a US destroyer with a fire-controlled radar is the equivalent of cocking a loaded gun and pointing it directly at a police officer's head. The threshold of innocent passage had been incinerated. The Iranian commander had just signaled intent to kill, forcing the Gravely's tactical action officer to make a split-second decision. The time for warnings was over. At exactly 0219 AM, the uneasy peace of the Red Sea was shattered by the staccato report of heavy machine gun fire. This wasn't a warning shot across the bow. Warning shots are fired safely ahead of a vessel to signal intent. These tracers were aimed directly at the bridge of the USS Gravely. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps had decided to turn a standoff into a firefight, unleashing a volley of 12.7mm rounds that zipped through the dark-seeking flesh and sensitive electronics. It was a flagrant, deliberate act of war, initiated by a commander who likely believed the darkness would cover his crimes. But he was wrong. The rounds fell short or splashed harmlessly against the destroyer's armored hull, a testament to the sheer inadequacy of the attacking force compared to the target they had foolishly chosen. On the bridge of the Gravely, there was no panic, only the disciplined execution of drilled procedure. The captain ordered a hard rudder turn, heeling the massive 9,000-ton warship sharply to starboard. This wasn't a retreat. It was a tactical maneuver designed to unmask the aft weapon systems and present a smaller target profile to the enemy. While the Iranians were spraying and praying, wasting ammunition in a chaotic display of aggression, the American crew was coolly locking in, firing solutions. The contrast couldn't be starker, a rogue militia lashing out with the emotional maturity of a toddler versus the calculated icy restraint of a superpower, waiting for the exact legal millisecond to unleash hell. The Iranians had fired the first shot, effectively signing their own death warrants, but the Gravely was going to make sure the last shot was the only one that mattered. With the incoming fire confirmed, the Gravely's rules of engagement shifted instantly from de-escalate to neutralize. The tactical action officer didn't need to consult Washington. The authority to defend the ship is absolute. The response was not an emotional outburst of suppressing fire, it was a single, calculated stroke of violence. The ship's Mark 99 fire control system had already computed the trajectory, factoring in the wind, the roll of the sea, and the erratic speed of the Iranian vessel. A single button press unleashed the retort. The weapon, a precision munition designed to end engagements, not prolong them, tore away from the destroyer, illuminating the black water with a brief, blinding flash of rocket exhaust. It covered the distance in seconds, moving faster than the sound of the gunfire that had provoked it. This is where the technological disparity becomes a brutal lesson in modern warfare. The Americans didn't carpet bomb the grid square. They executed a surgical strike designed to incapacitate the threat with mathematical certainty. The projectile didn't just hit the boat, it found its mark with the finality of a sledgehammer crushing a tin can, slamming directly into the engineering section of the lead Iranian vessel. At the same moment, the Gravely's combat system was simultaneously tracking the other boats, its Phalanx CIWS, spinning up to 4,500 rounds per minute, creating a network of death around the destroyer that no biological pilot could penetrate. The Iranian swarm, which seconds ago acted like a pack of wolves, was instantly revealed to be nothing more than a group of amateurs trying to fight a computer-controlled god of war. The kinetic exchange lasted less than a minute, but in that time the US Navy demonstrated that they don't just survive ambushes, they dissect them. The immediate aftermath was a scene of smoking wreckage and humiliated silence. The lead Iranian fast attack craft wasn't vaporized. The Americans, demonstrating supreme confidence, had opted for a mobility kill, but it was effectively a floating coffin. Its engines were slag, its command console was dark, and it was drifting aimlessly in the chop at the mercy of the current. The other boats in the swarm, realizing the brutal arithmetic of bringing a machine gun to a missile fight, scattered into the darkness, abandoning their crippled comrade. For the USS Gravely, the engagement was over as quickly as it began. Damage assessment 0. Casualties 0. The destroyer continued its patrol without even needing to reduce speed, its radar sweeping the horizon for the next threat. Back in Tehran, the propaganda machine attempted to spin the disaster into a victory. State media claimed their brave sailors had forced the Great Satan to retreat, but in the era of networked warfare, lies have a short shelf life. The US Navy simply released the gun camera footage. The grainy black and white FLIR video showed the undeniable truth: Iranian tracers splashing harmlessly into the water, followed by the precise, devastating US response that silenced the aggressor instantly. It was a public relations nightmare for the IRGC. They had attempted to portray themselves as the lions of the Red Sea, but the footage revealed them to be incompetent amateurs flailing against a professional military. The international community took note. There was no condemnation of the US response because the video evidence made it clear Iran had pulled the trigger, but America had finished the job. The merciless retaliation promised by the Iranians had backfired spectacularly, leaving them with a broken boat and a bruised ego, while the US Navy demonstrated that they could dismantle a threat without breaking a sweat. This 90-second firefight reverberates much louder in Beijing and Moscow than it does in Tehran. For years, military analysts in China and Russia have championed the doctrine of asymmetric warfare, the idea that you can defeat a technologically superior US Navy by overwhelming it with cheap, numerous expendable assets. The theory was that a billion-dollar destroyer could be brought down by $150,000 speedboats. The incident with the USS Gravely exposed that theory for what it is: a dangerous delusion. The Iranian swarm failed not because they lacked courage, but because they failed to understand the physics of modern combat. They were fighting a ship. The ship was fighting as part of a planetary network. The mistake Iran made, and the lesson China must learn, is misidentifying the center of gravity. When you engage an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, you aren't dueling a single vessel. You are engaging a node in a vast, interconnected kill web. The Gravely's sensors were feeding data to satellites which were feeding data to the Pentagon, which could instantly allocate resources from carrier strike groups hundreds of miles away. The Iranian boats were isolated units operating on visual cues. The American ship was a sensory vacuum cleaner operating with omniscient situational awareness. This crushes the gray zone strategy. Adversaries love to operate in the gray zone, harassing ships just below the threshold of war, assuming the US will be too afraid of escalation to fire back. The Gravely proved that the US Navy has calculated the exact coordinates where the gray zone ends and the kill zone begins. By crossing that line, Iran didn't expose American weakness. They inadvertently advertised the terrifying efficiency of the American shield. It turns out that when you bring a knife to a nuclear gunfight, you don't get an asymmetric victory. You get obliterated. Ultimately, the night the Gravely fired back wasn't just a skirmish, it was a revelation. We often talk about red lines in geopolitics as if they are rhetorical devices used by diplomats in air-conditioned rooms. This engagement proved that the real red lines are digital. They are drawn in binary code on an Aegis display in the middle of a dark ocean. Iran attempted to use the cover of night to rewrite the rules of the road, but they forgot that against a modern super-destroyer, darkness is not concealment, it is a trap. They were yelling at a security camera thinking they were intimidating the lens, not realizing that the system behind it was already authorized to use lethal force. The message from the Red Sea is clear. You can play games in the gray zone, but once you lock your radar on a US warship, the game ends and the physics of interception take over. If you want to understand the invisible technologies that decide who lives and who dies in modern conflict, subscribe to The Military Show. We track the signals the others miss.